They thought she was a nobody. They thought she was a broke, desperate housewife, clinging to a wealthy husband who had replaced her with a younger model. Dominic Calloway didn't just divorce his wife. He tried to erase her. He threw her out into the rain with nothing but the clothes on her back, laughing as he signed the papers that left her penniless. But Dominic forgot one crucial detail. He never actually checked who she was before he married her. When the judge read her birth name aloud, the entire courtroom didn't just go silent. It froze in terrified awe. Because the woman standing in the defendant's box wasn't a charity case. She was the landlord of the very building they were standing in. The rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse on West 57th Street, blurring the lights of Manhattan into streaks of grey and gold. Inside, the atmosphere was colder than the storm. Serafina stood by the white marble kitchen island, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. Across from her, Dominic Calloway adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of the microwave, not even bothering to look at her. He checked his Patek Philippe watch, a gift she had saved for 3 years to buy him on his 30th birthday, and sighed with exaggerated impatience. "Are we done crying yet, Sarah?" Dominic asked, his voice smooth but laced with the specific cruelty of a man who had stopped caring long ago. "The movers will be here in 20 minutes. I want your boxes in the service elevator before Bianca arrives. She's allergic to clutter." Serafina swallowed the lump in her throat. "Clutter? Dominic, I've lived here for 5 years. This is my home." "Was," he corrected, finally turning to face her. He was handsome, undeniably so, with the kind of sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes that made investors trust him with millions. But Serafina now saw the emptiness behind them. "It was your home when you were useful, when I needed a doting wife to play the part while I built Calloway Tech. But let's be honest, Sarah, you don't fit the brand anymore. You're plain, unambitious." He tossed a thick manila envelope onto the marble. It landed with a heavy slap. "The prenup," he said. "Ironclad. You get what you came in with." Which, if I recall correctly, was a pile of student debt and a beat-up Honda Civic. I've been generous, though. I paid off the Civic. Consider it a severance package. The front door clicked open. It wasn't the movers. The click of high heels echoed on the hardwood floor. Bianca strutted in, shaking a wet umbrella onto the rug Serafina had hand-woven herself. Bianca was everything Serafina wasn't currently presenting as: flashy, loud, and draped in labels. She wore a red trench coat that cost more than Serafina's annual grocery budget. "Oh good, she's still here," Bianca said, looking at Serafina like one might look at a stain on a carpet. She walked up to Dominic and kissed him deeply, right in front of Serafina. Dominic didn't pull away. He leaned into it, his hand resting possessively on Bianca's waist. "I told her to hurry," Dominic murmured against Bianca's lips. Serafina looked at the envelope. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she looked at the man she had loved for half a decade. "You're throwing me out on the street, Dominic. Tonight? It's pouring. I have nowhere to go." "That sounds like a you problem," Bianca chimed in, smirking. "Dominic, baby, did you tell her about the gala?" Dominic chuckled. "Not yet. Sarah, next week is the Tech Innovators Gala. Bianca and I are being honored as the Power Couple of the Year. It wouldn't do to have my ex-wife lurking around the apartment while the press is interviewing us. You understand, right? It's strictly business." "Business," Serafina repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Look," Dominic said, stepping forward and looming over her. "You were a waitress when I found you. I gave you a life of luxury for 5 years. You didn't have to work. You didn't have to struggle. You lived off my hard work. Now the ride is over. Sign the papers, take your clothes and get out. If you fight this, I will bury you in legal fees until you're begging for change on the subway." Serafina stared at him. For a moment, a flash of something unrecognizable flickered in her brown eyes. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness, it looked almost like pity. She reached out, picked up the pen lying next to the papers, and signed her name. Serafina Cross. Dominic blinked, surprised. He had expected begging. He had expected a scene. "Smart girl," he sneered. "At least you know when you're beaten." "I'm not beaten, Dominic," Serafina said softly. She walked to the hallway, where a single, modest suitcase was already packed. She hadn't packed the jewelry he bought her. She hadn't packed the designer dresses he forced her to wear to his events. Just her old jeans, her books, and a small, locked metal box she kept under the bed. She opened the front door, the wind howling from the hallway vent. "One last thing," Serafina said, pausing at the threshold. She didn't look back. "Make sure you read the lease agreement for this penthouse very carefully before you host that gala." Dominic laughed, a loud barking sound. "The lease? I own this penthouse, you delusional woman. I bought it 3 years ago." "Did you?" Serafina whispered. She stepped out, and the door slammed shut behind her, leaving Dominic and Bianca alone in the warmth. "What a psycho," Bianca laughed, wandering into the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine. "Talking about leases, she's probably having a breakdown." Dominic shrugged, picking up the signed divorce papers. "Who cares? She's gone, and she didn't cost me a dime." He looked out the window, watching a small figure in a raincoat exit the building and disappear into the dark, wet streets of New York. He felt like a king. He had the money, the fame, the beautiful mistress, and he had just shed the dead weight of his boring wife. He had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. Serafina didn't go to a shelter. She didn't call a friend to crash on a couch. She walked 3 blocks in the pouring rain, the water soaking through her thin coat, until she reached a nondescript black sedan parked in a loading zone on 6th Avenue. She tapped on the rear window. The glass rolled down smoothly. Inside sat an older man with silver hair, impeccably dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit. He looked at her wet hair and the cheap suitcase, his expression tightening with suppressed rage. "Get in, Miss Serafina," the man said, his voice clipped and precise. Serafina tossed her suitcase into the front seat and slid into the back. The leather was warm, the climate control set to a perfect 70 degrees. As soon as the door closed, the noise of the city vanished, replaced by the soft hum of the engine. "You look terrible," the man said, handing her a towel woven with gold thread. "Hello to you too, Garrison," Serafina said, drying her face. She took a deep breath, the smell of cheap cleaning products from the penthouse finally fading, replaced by the scent of old leather and expensive cologne. "Did he sign?" Garrison Ford asked. He wasn't just a driver. Garrison Ford was the senior managing partner of Ford, Sterling and Halloway, one of the most feared law firms in London and New York. He was also her godfather. "He signed," Serafina said, leaning her head back against the seat and closing her eyes. "He thinks he won. He thinks I'm homeless." "The arrogance of the man," Garrison muttered, signaling the driver to pull away. "To think he could buy the Pinnacle penthouse without a background check on the holding company. He really believes he owns it?" "He wired $12 million to an offshore LLC called Chimera Holdings," Serafina said, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. "He never asked who owned Chimera. He just wanted the address. He's obsessed with status. And he has no idea. None. I played the part perfectly, Garrison. The orphan waitress. The girl with no connections. I cooked his meals. I ironed his shirts. I let him talk down to me about economics while I was secretly managing a portfolio 10 times the size of his entire company. Garrison poured her a glass of sparkling water from the car's console. Why did you stay so long, Sarah? We could have crushed him 2 years ago when he started the affair with that Instagram model. Serafina looked out the window as they passed the glittering storefronts of Fifth Avenue. Because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to believe that somewhere, deep down, he loved me for me. Not for the name, not for the Blackwood legacy. I wanted to see if a man could love Serafina Cross, the nobody. She took a sip of the water. Her eyes hardened. The soft, submissive wife was gone. In her place sat the woman who had been trained since birth to run an empire. I have my answer now, she said coldly. He didn't love me. He loved having a servant. Where to? Garrison asked. The estate in the Hamptons, or the townhouse on the Upper East Side? Neither, Serafina said. Take me to the Pierre Hotel. I need to set up a war room. And Garrison? Yes, Miss Blackwood? Freeze the assets of Chimera Holdings, specifically the property management division. If he wants to host a gala in my apartment, he's going to find the locks changed. Garrison smiled, a shark-like grin that terrified opposition lawyers. The deed is in your name, technically, but he thinks he holds the title. When do you want to drop the hammer? Not yet, Serafina calculated. Let him have his night. Let him invite the press. Let him invite the investors. I want the world to be watching when the ground falls out from under him. But first, we need to handle the divorce hearing. He fast-tracked it. The court date is in 3 days. He bribed a clerk to get it pushed through so he could be a single man for the gala. 3 days, Garrison mused. That's barely enough time to file a counter-motion. We aren't filing a motion, Serafina said, opening the small metal box she had brought from the apartment. Inside lay a single, heavy signet ring, bearing a crest of a black hawk, holding a golden key. She slipped it onto her pinky finger. We're going to let him present his case. We're going to let him slander me. We're going to let him tell the judge that I am a leech who deserves nothing. And then, Serafina said, her voice dropping an octave, I'm going to introduce him to my father. Garrison raised an eyebrow. Your father is in Geneva. He hasn't stepped foot in a New York courtroom in 20 years. He will for this, Serafina said. Dominic Calloway didn't just break my heart, Garrison. He insulted the family, and you know the family motto. Garrison nodded solemnly. Nemo me impune lacessit. No one attacks me with impunity. The car sped through the rain, carrying the secret heir to the Blackwood Shipping Consortium, a fortune so old and vast it made Dominic's tech startup look like a lemonade stand. Toward her revenge. Back at the penthouse, Dominic was toasting with champagne, blissfully unaware that the poor waitress he had just evicted owned the champagne brand he was drinking, the building he was standing in, and quite possibly the bank that held his loans. The following morning, Dominic Calloway woke up feeling like the master of the universe. Sunlight, too much sunlight, was streaming directly onto his face. He squinted, groaning as he reached for the bedside tablet that controlled the penthouse's smart environment system. He tapped the icon to lower the blackout shades. Access denied. Contact administrator. Dominic frowned, tapping it again, harder. Stupid glitch, he muttered. He tried to adjust the thermostat, which read a chilly 60 degrees. Access denied. Contact administrator. Bianca, he yelled, sitting up. Did you mess with the control panel? Bianca groaned from beneath the duvet, her voice muffled. I didn't touch anything. It's freezing in here, Dom. Fix it. I have a facial at 10, and I can't go looking puffy from the cold. Dominic threw the covers off, marching into the hallway. The penthouse was a marvel of modern technology, a prototype for the smart living systems his company, Callaway Tech, was selling to investors. He had bought this place through a shell company to keep it off the public record during the divorce negotiations, assuming total control. But today, the house felt hostile. He walked to the main interface panel in the kitchen. The screen was flashing a red icon he hadn't seen before, a small, stylized key inside a hawk's talons. "What is that?" he whispered. He tried to override the system using his developer code. The screen simply blinked, "Unauthorized user." Frustrated, he grabbed his phone and dialed the building's concierge. "This is Mr. Callaway in the penthouse. My system is locked out. Reset it immediately." There was a pause on the line. The concierge, usually obsequious and eager to please, sounded strangely distant. "I'm afraid I cannot do that, Mr. Callaway. The building management system has undergone a firmware update overnight. All tenant controls are temporarily suspended, pending owner verification." "I am the owner," Dominic snapped, his patience fraying. "I bought the unit 3 years ago." "According to our records, you are the primary occupant," the concierge corrected smoothly. "The deed is held by Chimera Holdings. The update came directly from their corporate office. You'll have to contact them." Dominic hung up, slamming the phone onto the marble counter. "Chimera Holdings is me," he muttered to himself. "I set it up. It's a shell." He dialed his personal lawyer, Arthur Pendergast. Arthur was a bulldog of a man, expensive and morally flexible. "Arthur, why is the shell company locking me out of my own house?" Dominic demanded, pouring himself a coffee, only to find the expensive espresso machine also displaying the access denied error. "Calm down, Dom," Arthur's voice crackled over the speaker. "It's probably an automated security protocol. I'll have my paralegal look into the LLC's filing status. Focus on the gala. Focus on the divorce hearing tomorrow. We need you looking unbothered. If Serafina sees you sweating, she might ask for more money." "She can ask all she wants," Dominic sneered, abandoning the coffee machine and grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "She's getting nothing. Did she respond to the settlement offer?" "Radio silence," Arthur said. "She has no lawyer of record yet, just a public defender notification. She's probably going to represent herself, which is pathetic. It'll be a slaughter, Dom. We'll be in and out in 20 minutes. Dominic relaxed slightly. A slaughter. That sounded good, but the day only got worse. At the Callaway Tech headquarters, Dominic walked into his office to find his CFO, a nervous man named Greg, sweating through his shirt. "We have a problem with the gala venue," Greg said, not making eye contact. "What problem? The plaza is booked. The deposits are paid." "The deposits bounced," Greg whispered. Dominic froze. "Excuse me, we have 40 million in the operating account." "We did," Greg said, sliding a tablet across the desk. "This morning at 9 a.m., the bank flagged our primary accounts for a compliance audit. It's a standard procedure, but usually they give us a warning. They've frozen outgoing transfers for 48 hours. 48 hours? The gala is in 3 days. I have vendors to pay. I have the press to bribe," Dominic roared. "Who authorized an audit?" "It wasn't the bank's internal team," Greg said, his hands shaking. "It was triggered by an external complaint, a priority flag from a major shareholder." "I am the major shareholder," Dominic shouted. "Technically, sir," Greg stammered. "Callaway Tech was built on that initial angel investment 5 years ago. The silent partner block. You know, the 15% we never identified." Dominic waved his hand dismissively. "That money came from a blind trust in Switzerland. They never vote. They never speak." "Why now?" "They spoke today," Greg said grimly. They cited mismanagement of funds and requested an immediate freeze. Dominic sank into his leather chair. The walls felt like they were closing in. First the house, now the company. It felt coordinated. But that was impossible. Serafina was the only person who had a motive, and she was currently, he assumed, crying in a motel room somewhere. She didn't know how to trigger a bank audit. She barely knew how to use the complicated remote for the TV. "Fix it," Dominic hissed. "Use the offshore reserves if you have to. I don't care if it's illegal. Fix it before the hearing tomorrow. I cannot walk into that courtroom looking like I'm broke." That night, back at the penthouse, the temperature had dropped to 55 degrees. Bianca was wearing her fur coat inside, pacing angrily. "This is ridiculous, Dominic. I can't live like this," she shrieked. "And my credit card was declined at Saks today. Do you know how embarrassed I was?" "It's a bank error, Bianca," Dominic snapped, nursing a glass of whiskey. "Stop whining. Tomorrow, after the court case, everything will be resolved. I'll have total legal clearance to liquidate Serafina's shared assets, what little there are, and we'll fix the cash flow." He looked out the window at the rain-soaked city. Somewhere out there, Serafina was suffering. The thought calmed him. He was Dominic Calloway. He was a winner. This was just a bump in the road. He didn't notice the black sedan parked on the street below, idling in the dark, watching his window. The New York Civil Courthouse was a drab, imposing building that smelled of floor wax and misery. It was a place where love went to die and be divided up into percentages. Dominic strode down the hallway, flanked by Arthur Pendergast and 2 junior associates. He looked every inch the tech mogul. A bespoke navy suit, hair perfectly coiffed, and an air of untouchable arrogance. Bianca held his arm, wearing a demure white dress that was clearly chosen to make her look innocent, though the diamond on her finger was large enough to choke a cat. "Remember," Arthur whispered, as they approached Courtroom 4B. "She's going to play the victim. Don't engage. Let me destroy her credibility. We're going for a total dismissal of spousal support based on the infidelity clause." "But she didn't cheat," Dominic whispered back, a smirk playing on his lips. Arthur winked. "Prove she didn't." They pushed through the heavy oak doors. The courtroom was sparsely populated. A bored bailiff stood by the wall. The judge's bench was empty. At the defendant's table, sitting entirely alone, was Serafina. Dominic paused. He had expected her to look wrecked. He expected puffy eyes, messy hair, maybe the same clothes she left in. Instead, Serafina looked impeccable. She wore a black suit that was tailored so sharply it could cut glass. It was simple, unbranded, but the fabric absorbed the light in a way that screamed quality. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. She sat with her back perfectly straight, hands folded on the table in front of her. No papers, no water bottle, just stillness. "She cleaned up well," Bianca whispered cattily. "Probably spent her last dime on a rental suit." Dominic felt a flicker of unease. "Where's her lawyer?" "She doesn't have one," Arthur chuckled. "Look at the table. Empty. She's going pro se. This is going to be easier than I thought." "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Harold Miller swept into the room. Judge Miller was known as a hanging judge in divorce courts. He despised time-wasters and had a soft spot for self-made men. Dominic had specifically maneuvered to get him assigned to the docket. "Case number 4922, Calloway versus Calloway," Judge Miller grunted, adjusting his glasses. "Appearances?" "Arthur Pendergast for the plaintiff. Dominic Calloway," Arthur announced, his voice booming with confidence. "And for the defendant?" The judge looked down at Serafina. Serafina stood up slowly. The representation for the defendant is en route, Your Honor. He requests a 5-minute recess. En route? Judge Miller scowled. This court runs on time, Mrs. Calloway. If your public defender is stuck in traffic, that is not my concern. We proceed. Very well, Serafina said calmly. She sat down. She didn't look panicked. She looked like she was watching a play she had already read the script for. Arthur Pendergast wasted no time. He launched into an opening statement that was a work of fiction. Your Honor, we are here to dissolve a marriage that was built on deception. While Mr. Calloway worked 18-hour days to build a technology empire that employs hundreds of New Yorkers, the defendant, Serafina Calloway, contributed nothing. No financial assets, no emotional support, no household management. In fact, we have reason to believe she was siphoning household funds for her own personal use. Dominic watched Serafina's face. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She just stared at Arthur with a gaze so cold it lowered the room temperature. Furthermore, Arthur continued, pacing in front of the judge, Mr. Calloway is a man of significant public standing. The defendant's refusal to sign the initial separation agreement is a clear attempt at extortion. She wants a payout she didn't earn. We are asking for the prenuptial agreement to be enforced strictly. She leaves with what she brought. Nothing. Judge Miller nodded, scribbling notes. Mrs. Calloway, do you have a response? Serafina stood again. I do, Your Honor. But I would prefer my counsel to deliver it. I told you, Judge Miller snapped. We are not waiting. The courtroom doors banged open. It wasn't a hesitant push. It was a slam that echoed like a gunshot. Every head turned. Walking down the center aisle were 3 men. Leading them was Garrison Ford. He was wearing a 3-piece suit that cost more than Dominic's car, carrying a leather briefcase with gold clasps. Flanking him were 2 younger attorneys, both carrying tall stacks of files. The air in the room changed instantly. Arthur Pendergast, who had been strutting like a peacock, suddenly froze. His face went pale. He knew exactly who Garrison Ford was. Everyone in the legal world knew Ford, Stanton, and Holloway. They didn't handle divorces. They handled mergers of nations. They handled royalty. Apologies for the delay, Your Honor, Garrison said, his voice smooth, British, and commanding. He didn't sound sorry at all. Security downstairs had trouble clearing the sheer volume of evidence we brought. Mr. Ford? Judge Miller looked stunned. He sat up straighter, adjusting his robe. I wasn't aware you took domestic cases. I don't, Garrison said, stopping at the defense table. He didn't even look at Dominic. He placed his briefcase on the table and opened it. I only take cases involving the protection of key assets for the Blackwood Consortium. Dominic leaned over to Arthur. Who is that? Why does he look familiar? Arthur was sweating. That's Garrison Ford. He's the legal shark for the European old money. Dominic, why is he here? He charges $2,000 an hour just to breathe. Your Honor, Garrison addressed the bench, ignoring the whispers. The plaintiff has presented a narrative that Serafina Calloway is a destitute woman seeking a handout. He claims she brought nothing to the marriage. Garrison pulled a single, thick document from his briefcase. It was bound in blue velvet. We are filing a countersuit, Garrison announced. Not for alimony, not for spousal support. We are filing for the immediate seizure of Calloway Tech and all associated assets on the grounds of theft, fraud, and breach of contract. Dominic jumped up. Theft? I built that company. She was a waitress. Sit down, Mr. Calloway, Judge Miller barked. Garrison turned slowly to face Dominic for the first time. His eyes were full of predatory amusement. You built the company using a seed fund from Chimera Holdings, Garrison said clearly. You live in a penthouse owned by Chimera Holdings. You drive a car leased by Chimera Holdings. So what? Dominic spat. That's my holding company. Is it? Garrison asked softly. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, if you will look at the incorporation documents for Chimera Holdings, you will see there is only one beneficial owner. The company was established 20 years ago to manage the trust fund of one individual. Garrison gestured to Serafina. May I introduce the court to the sole proprietor of Chimera Holdings, and by extension, the legal owner of Mr. Calloway's entire existence. Serafina stood up. She wasn't Serafina Calloway anymore. Her name, Garrison boomed, is Serafina Juliet Blackwood, heiress to the Blackwood Shipping Consortium, and Mr. Calloway, she is calling in her loans. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. Dominic Calloway felt the blood drain from his face, his knees buckling as the realization hit him like a freight train. He hadn't just divorced his wife. He had declared war on his landlord, his bank, and his boss. The silence in Courtroom 4B was not merely the absence of noise. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure of a reality collapsing. Dominic Calloway stood frozen, his hand half raised as if to object, but his voice had died in his throat. He looked at the woman he had dismissed as a simple, unambitious housewife. She didn't look back. She was examining her fingernails, her expression one of bored detachment. "This is preposterous," Arthur Pendergast finally sputtered, though his voice lacked its earlier boom. He was flipping frantically through the blue, velvet-bound document Garrison Ford had slapped onto the table. "You expect this court to believe that Mrs. Calloway, that this woman, is the primary financier of Calloway Tech. My client is the founder. He wrote the code. He built the brand." "Your client," Garrison Ford interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "Wrote the code, yes. But code does not pay for servers. Code does not pay for marketing. Code does not lease a 10,000 square foot office in Soho." Garrison turned to the judge. "Your Honor, 5 years ago, Mr. Calloway sought venture capital. He was rejected by every major firm in the city. He then received an offer from Chimera Holdings. He was so eager to secure the funds, $12 million in seed capital, that he didn't bother to meet the principal investor. He dealt entirely through intermediaries." Garrison pointed a long finger at Dominic. "Mr. Calloway signed a secured promissory note. It's right there on page 42, Arthur. Read it." Arthur's hands shook as he turned the pages. He stopped. His face went grey. "Read it aloud," Judge Miller commanded, leaning over the bench. Arthur swallowed hard, loosening his tie. Clause 7, Section B. In the event of a material change in the borrower's personal circumstances, including but not limited to divorce, criminal investigation, or public scandal, the lender, Chimera Holdings, reserves the right to invoke the acceleration clause, demanding immediate repayment of the principal sum plus accrued interest within 24 hours. "Immediate repayment," Garrison repeated. "The total current debt, with interest and penalties for the breach of contract regarding the penthouse lease, stands at approximately $55 million. Dominic found his voice. It was a high, strangled sound. "I don't have $55 million liquid. That's insane. The money is tied up in stock. In the company." "Correction," Garrison said, smiling coldly. "The money was in the company. But since you are in default as of this morning, Chimera Holdings has exercised its right to seize the collateral." "What collateral?" Dominic whispered. "The intellectual property," Serafina spoke. It was the first time she had addressed him directly. Her voice was low, melodic, and terrifying. She stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. "The patent for the Calloway algorithm," Serafina said, locking eyes with him. "You put it up as collateral, Dominic. You were so sure you'd never fail, so sure you were the smartest man in the room, that you signed away the rights to your own creation if you couldn't pay back the loan. You own the algorithm? Dominic grasped the edge of the table to steady himself. I own it, Serafina said. And as of 8:00 a.m. this morning, I have issued a cease and desist order to Callaway Tech prohibiting the use of my intellectual property. Your servers are shutting down as we speak. You can't do that, Bianca shrieked from the gallery, standing up. We have the gala on Saturday. We're the power couple of the year. Judge Miller banged his gavel so hard it sounded like a gunshot. Order! One more outburst from the gallery and you will be held in contempt. The judge turned his gaze to Dominic. The look was no longer one of professional courtesy. It was pity mixed with disgust. Mr. Pendergast, Judge Miller said, unless you can produce $55 million by tomorrow morning, I am granting the motion for asset seizure. The penthouse, the accounts, and the intellectual property remain with Chimera Holdings. Furthermore, given the revelations regarding the defendant's actual financial standing, the plaintiff's request for a penniless exit is denied. Case dismissed with prejudice. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Dominic didn't move. He felt like he was underwater. He watched Serafina gather her things. Garrison Ford snapped his briefcase shut. Serafina! Dominic rasped, stumbling toward the partition. Sarah, wait, please! She paused, turning slowly. Up close, he could see the diamond studs in her ears were real, flawless, vintage cuts that likely cost more than his car. How had he never noticed? How had he been so blind? It was a test, wasn't it? Dominic pleaded, his charm mode flickering on like a broken light bulb. You wanted to see if I could make it on my own. Baby, I did it. I built the company. We can fix this. We can combine the assets. Think of the power we'd have. Blackwood and Callaway. Serafina tilted her head. There is no we, Dominic. There is just you and the debt you owe me. But I love you, he lied, desperation leaking from his pores. Bianca, she meant nothing. It was stress. I was weak. Take me back. Let's go home. Serafina laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a light, genuine laugh of disbelief. Home? She asked. You threw me out of home yesterday, remember? You told me to get out before I cluttered up your life. She leaned in close. Her perfume, a custom blend of jasmine and oud, filling his senses. I'm not taking you back, Dominic. I'm taking everything else. She turned and walked out the double doors, flanked by her legal team. Dominic scrambled to follow, pushing past a stunned Arthur. He burst out into the hallway, expecting to catch her at the elevators. Instead, he ran straight into a wall of flashing lights. The hallway was packed with reporters. Not just the courtroom beat writers, but the heavy hitters. The Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Vanity Fair. Someone had tipped them off. Mr. Callaway, is it true you've been evicted from your own company? Dominic, comment on the allegations that your wife has been secretly funding your lifestyle. Are you facing bankruptcy? Dominic shielded his eyes, looking for Serafina. He saw her at the end of the hall, stepping into a private elevator. She didn't look back. The doors slid shut, severing him from her and leaving him to the wolves. Bianca grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Dominic, they're saying my credit cards are cancelled. Fix this. Tell them who you are. Dominic looked at the cameras, then at his sobbing mistress, and realized with a sickening lurch that for the first time in his life, he didn't know the answer to that question. 48 hours later, Dominic Callaway sat in a motel room in Queens. It was the only place that would take cash, and cash was all he had left, about $4,000 he had managed to withdraw from an ATM before the freeze hit his personal accounts. The last 2 days had been a blur of humiliation. When he tried to enter Callaway Tech, security, his security, had escorted him off the premises. The locks had been changed. His keycard was deactivated. When he tried to go back to the penthouse to get his clothes, the concierge simply handed him a box of his belongings left on the curb. His bespoke suits were wrinkled. His watch collection was missing, held as collateral against damages to the property. And Bianca? Bianca had lasted exactly 6 hours. Once she realized the credit cards were dead and the penthouse was gone, she had called him a loser and taken an Uber to her ex-boyfriend's loft in Brooklyn. But Dominic wasn't done. He still had one card to play, the Tech Innovators Gala. It was tonight, the biggest night of the year for the New York tech scene. He was the honoree. He was supposed to receive the Visionary Award. If I can just get on that stage, Dominic muttered to himself, splashing cold water on his face in the cracked motel mirror. If I can get the microphone, I can spin this. I can tell them it's a hostile takeover. I can paint Serafina as the villain, the jealous ex-wife trying to destroy innovation. He put on his one remaining tuxedo. It was slightly crumpled, but in the dim light it would pass. He shaved with a disposable razor. He looked pale, gaunt, but his eyes burned with a manic intensity. He took a yellow cab to the Plaza Hotel. He couldn't afford a limo. The scene outside the plaza was chaotic. Limousines were lined up 3 deep. The red carpet was awash in camera flashes. Dominic straightened his tie and marched toward the entrance. He saw the familiar face of the event coordinator, a woman named Sarah, holding the clipboard. "Dominic!" Sarah looked surprised to see him. She looked him up and down, noting the lack of an entourage and the slightly disheveled hair. We didn't think you were coming." "Of course I'm coming," Dominic said, flashing his signature grin, though it felt brittle. "I'm the guest of honor, aren't I?" Sarah bit her lip, looking uncomfortable. "Well, there have been some changes to the program. The board of the gala committee met this morning." "Changes?" Dominic's heart hammered against his ribs. "Just go inside," Sarah said, stepping aside. "You're still on the list." Dominic let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He walked onto the red carpet. He expected the photographers to scream his name. Instead, they lowered their cameras. A few whispered. One laughed. He hurried inside the grand ballroom. It was breathtaking. Chandeliers dripping with crystals, tables set with gold-leaf china, the elite of the city mingling in couture. But something was wrong. Usually, the massive screens behind the stage displayed the Callaway Tech logo, a stylized blue C. Tonight, the screens were displaying a different crest, a black hawk holding a golden key, the Blackwood crest, and underneath it, in elegant gold lettering, the Blackwood Foundation for Technological Ethics. "What is this?" Dominic whispered. He scanned the room. He saw his former investors. He saw the tech journalists who used to worship him. They were all looking toward the stage. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, "please welcome the new chairwoman of the board for the entity formerly known as Callaway Tech, Ms. Serafina Blackwood." The room erupted in applause. Serafina walked onto the stage. If she looked beautiful in the courtroom, tonight she looked like a deity of vengeance. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her curves, with a neckline that plunged daringly low. Around her neck sat the Star of Geneva, a sapphire necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, rumored to be worth more than the entire gross domestic product of a small island nation. She approached the microphone. She didn't smile. She looked out over the crowd, her gaze sweeping the room until it landed, with laser precision, on Dominic, standing alone near the shrimp cocktail station. "Thank you," Serafina said, her voice amplified, rich and steady. For years, this company was run on a philosophy of move fast and break things, including people. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. We were told that the genius behind the code was a singular man, Serafina continued. But the truth is, innovation requires stability, it requires integrity, and it requires capital. She paused. Effective immediately, Callaway Tech is being rebranded as Aegis Systems. We are pivoting away from consumer data mining and toward cybersecurity for charitable organizations. We are scrubbing the old code. She looked directly at Dominic. And we are scrubbing the old management. The era of the visionary who builds castles on other people's foundations is over. Dominic felt the eyes of 500 people turn to him. He felt naked. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. However, Serafina said, her voice softening deceptively, we do believe in giving credit where it is due. We have a special presentation to honor the past. Dominic perked up. Was this it? A peace offering? Acknowledgement? Please turn your attention to the screens, Serafina said. The Blackwood crest vanished. In its place, a video began to play. It wasn't a tribute. It was footage from a security camera. It was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. It was the kitchen of the penthouse, dated 3 nights ago. Dominic's voice echoed through the ballroom. You lived off my hard work. Now, the ride is over. If you fight this, I will bury you in legal fees until you're begging for change on the subway. Gasps filled the room. Then, Bianca's voice. She's probably having a breakdown. What a psycho. Then, Dominic again. Who cares? She's gone, and she didn't cost me a dime. The video froze on Dominic's sneering face. Serafina looked down at him from the stage. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You were right, Dominic, she said into the microphone, her voice cold as the grave. I didn't cost you a dime. I cost you everything. She stepped back from the podium. The applause didn't start immediately. It started with a slow clap from Garrison Ford in the front row. Then the investors joined in. Then the press. Within seconds, the entire room was giving Serafina Blackwood a standing ovation. Dominic backed away. He bumped into a waiter, sending a tray of champagne crashing to the floor. The sound shattered the spell. Sir! A large security guard appeared at his elbow. You're causing a disturbance. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I built this, Dominic stammered, tears of rage pricking his eyes. She's lying. This way, sir, the guard said, gripping Dominic's arm with a hand the size of a ham hock. He was dragged out of the ballroom, past the staring faces of the people he had tried to impress for a decade. He was hauled through the lobby and thrown out the front doors of the Plaza Hotel. He landed on the pavement, scuffing his hands. It was raining again. Dominic sat on the wet concrete, listening to the muffled applause from inside the ballroom. He looked up. Across the street, a massive digital billboard in Times Square flickered. It was a news alert. Breaking news. ARS reclaims tech empire. Fraud investigation opened into former CEO Dominic Callaway. Dominic put his head in his hands. The cold rain soaked through his tuxedo, chilling him to the bone. He had wanted to be famous. He had wanted the world to know his name. And now, they finally did. 6 months had passed since the night of the gala. In the high-speed world of New York finance, 6 months is usually enough time for a scandal to be forgotten, buried under the next wave of gossip. But the fall of Dominic Callaway was different. It was a cautionary tale that refused to die. It was studied in business schools as a masterclass in hubris, and in law schools as a terrifying example of what happens when you sign a contract without reading the fine print. Winter had descended on Manhattan, turning the city into a biting, wind-swept canyon. On Fifth Avenue, The holiday lights were glittering, casting a festive glow over the wealthy shoppers carrying bags from Bergdorf Goodman and Tiffany's. Dominic Calloway stood on the curb outside Le Coucou, one of the most exclusive French restaurants in the city. He wasn't dining there. He was wearing a heavy, ill-fitting maroon coat with a name tag that read simply, Dom. He rubbed his gloved hands together, trying to generate some warmth. The fraud investigation launched by the SEC following Serafina's revelations had been thorough and brutal. He had avoided prison only by pleading guilty to gross negligence and agreeing to a lifetime ban from serving as an officer of any public company. His assets were seized to pay creditors. The penthouse was gone. The cars were gone. Even his reputation was liquidated. Now, at 34 years old, the former tech visionary was working as a valet parker for a third-party staffing agency. It was the only job he could get where they didn't check his credit score or Google his name. "Hey, Dom!" The head valet, a 19-year-old kid named Kevin, shouted. "Wake up! We got a VIP incoming. The boss said handle this one with kid gloves. It's a Phantom." Dominic stiffened. A Rolls-Royce Phantom. He used to lease one. He remembered the smell of the leather, the silent power of the engine. Now he was just the guy who parked it. The massive black car glided to the curb like a land shark. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like oil. Dominic stepped forward, his training kicking in. "Open the door. Smile. Don't make eye contact unless spoken to. Expect a $5 tip if you're lucky." He reached for the handle of the rear passenger door and pulled it open. A pair of black Louboutin heels stepped onto the pavement. Then, the hem of a silver silk dress. Dominic froze. He knew that scent. Jasmine and oud. It hit him like a physical blow to the chest, stopping his breath. Serafina stepped out of the car. She looked radiant. The stress that had lived in her eyes during their marriage was gone, replaced by a serene, untouchable confidence. She was laughing at something the man inside the car had said. Dominic wanted to run. He wanted to vanish into the pavement. But his feet were lead. He stood there, holding the door, his face pale and unshaven, staring at the woman he had thrown away. She turned to close the door, and her eyes landed on him. For a second, there was no recognition. He was just part of the scenery, just another servant in a city of millions. Then, her gaze sharpened. She took in the cheap maroon coat, the scuffed shoes, the name tag. The silence stretched, louder than the city traffic. "Hello, Dominic," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't mocking. It was devastatingly indifferent. It was the tone you use for an old acquaintance you barely remember. "Serafina," he croaked, his voice cracking. I didn't know you were coming here." "We're celebrating," she said simply. "Aegis Systems just acquired its biggest competitor in London. It's a good night." The man in the car stepped out. He was tall, distinguished, with salt and pepper hair and a kind face. He walked around the car and took Serafina's hand. He didn't look like a shark. He looked like a partner. "Ready, darling?" the man asked. "Just a moment, James," Serafina said. She turned back to Dominic. She opened her clutch, a small, diamond-encrusted thing that probably cost more than Dominic's entire year of wages at the valet stand. She pulled out a crisp $100 bill. Dominic stared at the money. His pride screamed at him to throw it back in her face, to yell that he didn't need her charity, that he was still Dominic Calloway. But then he remembered his rent was due in 2 days. He remembered the ramen noodles he'd been eating for weeks. He remembered the hole in his left shoe. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he reached out and took the bill. "Keep the change," Serafina said softly. She didn't wait for a thank you. She turned took James's arm, and walked into the warmth of the restaurant, the golden light swallowing her whole. Dominic stood alone on the cold sidewalk. The wind howled down the avenue, cutting through his cheap coat. He looked at the bill in his hand. It was real. It was tangible. And it was the most humiliating thing that had ever happened to him. "Yo, Dom, move the car, man! You're blocking the lane!" Kevin shouted from the stand. Dominic snapped out of his trance. He looked at the Rolls-Royce idling beside him. For a fleeting, insane moment, he thought about getting in and driving. Driving until the gas ran out. Driving until he found a place where nobody knew who he was. But he didn't. He didn't have the gas money. He didn't have the courage. He slid into the driver's seat. The leather was warm, heated by the bodies of the people who actually mattered. He adjusted the mirror and caught his own reflection. His eyes were hollow. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. He put the car in gear and drove it toward the parking garage, disappearing into the dark, underground tunnels of the city, while high above him, in the penthouse of the world, Serafina Cross finally, truly, began her life. Dominic Calloway had wanted a trophy wife to look good on his arm. He never realized until it was too late that he was holding a diamond, and he was the one who was just cheap glass. And that is the story of how Dominic Calloway learned the hardest lesson of his life. Never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book owns the library. He thought he could discard Serafina like yesterday's trash, blind to the fact that she was the very foundation his success was built on. It's a brutal reminder that arrogance is often the precursor to a fall, and that true power doesn't need to shout, it just needs to sign the checks. What would you have done if you were Serafina? Would you have taken him back when he begged, or was leaving him in the valet stand the perfect revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.